I'm now excited to be joined by a very special guest. It is a first-time guest, in fact. It is the Tulsa World's Barry Tramel. Barry, I've got a lot of Oklahoma things that I want to get to with you, but I've got to start with the story of how we met, and I promise it'll have a much better ending than How I Met Your Mother. No spoiler alerts there, but um, last year at SEC Media Days, you came up to me, and I was kind of blown away when you told me that you had been listening to the show just to learn more about the SEC. So instead of asking you what you've learned from this show, which probably pretty minimal, like we don't really, we just kind of throw around a bunch of takes on here. But what have you learned about the SEC since Oklahoma joined the conference a year ago?
Oh, thousands of things. Nothing major. I think the SEC is as it was billed. You know, we were told the venues are going to be great. I figured they were. They were. Been to See, I went to Ole Miss, Alabama, Ole Miss, LSU, Auburn, and Missouri last season. So, um, told the football was great. I knew that already. What's been the most pleasant surprise to me is how not just efficient and professional, but friendly and helpful the SEC office is.
Agreed.
And that's not I mean, the Big 12 is really good too. Got a lot of friends down there, but for such a powerful and influential organization as the SEC, from Greg Sankey on down, just everybody's just really easy to deal with. It's a little bit of a throwback, to be honest with you, and I was not expecting that. And that's just been a very pleasant thing. If I need something, I can call. I can call the SEC office. It almost always gets taken care of with helping me with whatever. And it's not the button down, professional. I was thinking it would be more like the NFL or the NBA or something, and it's really, really a bunch of helpful people. So that's just been it's been a great thing for me.
Something to be said for that. It doesn't, and I came in this, like you, as an outsider and somebody that quickly had to learn the ways of the conference. And for a league that has been so dominant that so many people want to talk about, I've never ever gotten the sense that the conference is elitist to those who cover it. Now, there is definitely a different perception when Greg Sankey gets up to the microphone and talks about wanting more bids for the SEC and the NCAA tournament and stuff like that. But you're right. There is something to be said for how inclusive the SEC feels. It never feels like it's getting to that place where it just wants to, turn its nose up to everyone and everything. It is. I couldn't agree with that more. I think it's extremely welcoming. It probably hasn't felt very welcoming for Oklahoma though. Like that's the tough part is that, man, how humbling of a year that was. How many OU fans do you think had to do a quick 180 on all things SEC after seeing what it was like and what a down year in this conference looks like?
Well, yeah, the Sooners have the unfortunate timing of being on sort of a down cycle when they entered the SEC. And I think most fans realize that. The Oklahoma's, proud program, high opinion of itself, demands excellence, high expectations, all those things. But the last 3 years before entering the SEC were not golden years for Oklahoma. They had a 6-7 season in 2022 in the Big 12. So, I think they sort of knew that it was going to be a rocky climb in year one, and we'll see about year two. So it's just bad timing. If OU had joined the SEC in 2017 when Bob Stoops handed over that great team to Lincoln Riley, well then here they come with guns a blazing. But the talent level is not what it needs to be. You look at the NFL draft; they had two guys drafted Saturday or Thursday through Saturday. Um, the identity is taking a hit. They're making the transition from the great offense to playing a lot more defense. It's gone okay on the defensive end. Brent's doing a great job with the defense. The offense has not been up to speed. So those kinds of things. I think people sort of knew this was in the offering. I don't know that they expected 6-7, but they knew that, hey, they probably going to be a little bit before they make it to Atlanta for an SEC championship game.
Barry, you wrote about something that deserved more national discussion than it probably got. Oklahoma letting Dylan Gabriel move on was one of the biggest missteps that's kind of defined the 2024 season. What would OU's season have looked like if Gabriel had stayed instead of transferring to Oregon?
Well, they would have won more games. Now, one quarterback's not going to get you five more wins, I don't think. But everybody saw the ineptitude of the OU offense. There were times when it got a little bit acceptable, but for most of this season, the offense was terrible, historically bad. That was not all Jackson Arnold's fault or Michael Hawkins in his three starts. It wasn't necessarily all their fault. We had, we had all kinds of chronicles of the offensive ineptitude. New coordinator Seth Luttrell just wasn't up to speed. Offensive line was a disaster. The injuries racked up extensively on the receivers. But what I took from the whole thing is I think it was a major learning experience for Brent as a head coach. I think he is so defensive focused that I really think he just sort of didn't prioritize offense in the way that a head coach has to. And, we've seen, Lincoln Riley sort of got labeled with the same thing, only opposite. But Lincoln never had a decision to make like who's going to quarterback your defense. That's the quarterback of an offense is, it's the most important position in sports. And I just think Brent sort of just blew it off and said, it doesn't, Jackson Arnold's a good prospect. He's good. He's going to, he won't cost as much money. And we've got him for 2 or 3 more years. We'll just go with him. Massive mistake. When you've got a quarterback like Dylan Gabriel who's willing to stay for the going rate, he wasn't holding OU hostage for $3 or $4 million a year. You sign him up and say, thanks, Dylan. 3 years with you at quarterback. We're blessed. And they let him go and they paid the price. I think the good news is I think Brent realizes what he did and realized, hey, we got to have a quarterback. So it was a tough lesson to learn, but clearly, the Sooners paid the price for that in what you saw with that Oklahoma offense all season.
It's an important caveat to remember that too, is that Gabriel was willing to stay, and it is a situation which OU moved on from him, and they made this decision. Look, 1 year of Dylan Gabriel versus potentially the next 3 years of Jackson Arnold. Let's go with the latter, and let's go with the guy that we recruited. And I think Gabriel's going to be a really interesting case study for guys to max out their eligibility and to find the right home, because for that guy to get picked in the third round as a sub 6 foot 24-year-old quarterback, to me, that only happens if he follows Bo Nix's footsteps at Oregon. It doesn't happen if he stays at Oklahoma, but there is going to be something to be said for that. I've talked ad nauseum about why it didn't work out for Jackson Arnold at Oklahoma. We're just talking about all the different factors, the offensive line, the new look offensive line, the receivers going down like flies. I mean, it was just everything that could go wrong did go wrong for that Oklahoma offense. And it was different than the Spencer Rattler situation, because that felt like he was more responsible for some of his undoing, even though it was, different with the quarterbacks before him. But what did you make of Jackson Arnold's time in Norman from start to finish, of like the guy that came in so decorated from the state of Texas into the moment he left? Like, how should we talk about his time in Norman?
Well, Jackson Arnold, I think, is also a guy that's, we talk about OU's timing entering the SEC. Jackson Arnold is a clear example of a guy who wasn't ready for that moment and that responsibility. And 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, no doubt, he would never have been asked to. But this day and age, Kansas State coach Chris Kleiman told me this early last season. They let Will Howard go to Ohio State. They kept Avery Johnson, and K-State's happy. They're happy for Will Howard won the national title. K-State loves Avery Johnson. It worked out. They made the same decision Oklahoma did. It just worked out. But Chris Kleiman said, you can only pay one quarterback. And we chose to pay Avery Johnson. And this day and age, you can only pay one quarterback. And even if it's just his second year on campus, he's got to be ready. If you're paying him, he's got to be ready to play. And it's just clear that, Jackson Arnold wasn't ready. Maybe in year 3 down in Auburn, maybe this is the time. We look at here at Oklahoma, everybody's measured by Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray became the OU starting quarterback in his fourth year in college. Baker Mayfield became the Oklahoma starting quarterback in his third year of college. And now guys get thrown in. Uh, Bryce Underwood at Michigan's a good example. He's going to get baptized. Texas has been able to sort of bring Arch Manning along. We'll see how Arch does, but asking guys to play before they're ready can be troublesome. And I think that's what happened with Jackson Arnold. He played just a fraction of his freshman year, played the bowl game against Arizona, and threw 3 interceptions. Played okay otherwise, but that's a Mrs. Lincoln deal. So I just think he wasn't ready for the moment, and in a previous time and a previous place, he wouldn't have been asked to be in that moment, but now he is. So just unfortunate timing. He clearly was a great high school player, clearly a 5-star, all those things. Oklahoma bet a little bit too much on that recruiting stock though, and it cost them.
How do you think it's going to play out for Jackson Arnold at Auburn?
Well, I think a couple of questions. Is he damaged by that season at Oklahoma? Because he got gun shy quick. Oklahoma took him out of that Tennessee game. If you remember, he got benched right before halftime at Tennessee when he just sort of lost his head and was doing things that weren't even it wasn't a misread or a poor decision. He was just doing crazy things. And Brent Venables was so alarmed, he took him out of the game and didn't put him back in for 3 or 4 weeks. So can he learn from that? When he came back, he was better. He still wasn't great. The game at Missouri was a total disaster. Losing the game in the last seconds with a careless fumble, a scoop and score by Mizzou to win the game. It's not acceptable at this level of football. So has he been damaged by that? I don't have any idea. Hugh Freeze is certainly a coach that knows what he's doing. He can reclimate, I think, uh, Jackson Arnold. I just don't know if he will, but he's got the tools. People love his tools. Now he's got some experience. It's rough experience, but um, we'll see. Auburn, of course, had a interesting football team. They Peyton Thorne was a pretty good quarterback, except he'd throw the ball to the other team on occasion. Jackson Arnold, sort of the same thing in Norman last year.
The thing I always find fascinating about the Oklahoma quarterback situation is that as great as it's been in the 21st century, the last Oklahoma starting quarterback who started and finished his career in Norman was Landry Jones. He's guy just turned 36 years old. And that's like such a wild thing to process with the decade really that Oklahoma quarterbacks had, where it was the gold standard at the position. John Mateer is not going to break that trend after coming over from Washington State. What is your initial impression of him at Oklahoma?
Well, he's checking all the boxes. He came in not by design, not anything he decided to do, but he came in with a personality and a little bit of a flair that reminds a lot of people of Baker Mayfield,
Mm.
who frankly is, exalted status in Norman of all the quarterbacks and all the greats. Baker might be the most beloved because he had the personality and the swash and the confidence, and people just attracted to it. Mateer is a little bit along those lines. He's got a little bit of swagger to him. He comes in and just assumes the leadership mantle automatically. Really good player at Washington State. Lots of reasons to think he's going to do well, and people just automatically just anointed him as the next. And you're right, Connor. The Sooners sort of got out ahead of the rest of the nation, really, on transfer quarterbacking after Landry Jones, really, and they thought, let's use that portal if it wasn't called a portal at the time, but let's use the transfers to get guys in. They had 3 straight quarterbacks in consecutive years that went 1-1-1-2 in the Heisman. All 3 were imports, adding Jalen Hurts to the list, and the freshmen that they've signed some of the best quarterbacks in America in terms of high school kids. Spencer Rattler, good quarterback, got beat out by Caleb Williams, a great quarterback. Spencer hits the road. Caleb eventually hits the road with Lincoln Riley. Dylan Gabriel, we've talked about. So, this, I tell people, the Oklahoma highway system is not a series of one-way highways into Norman. There are roads out of Norman too. So the same thing that's helped the Sooners have hurt the Sooners. They got NFL quarterbacks now all over the place that left school. So it's John Mateer looks the part. He looks like he'll be the next really good quarterback. If he's a great quarterback, then this season looks different. If he's just a good quarterback, we'll see. But he's certainly checked all the boxes. Looks like he's the kind of player they need.
Last year, it just felt like such a different internal vibe with Brent Venables compared to the external vibe of what people were saying about him, probably myself included, until I actually started to talk to people who know Oklahoma very well, Chris Planks of the world and people that are living and breathing this. It just I think that extension threw a lot of people off guard, and a lot of people were all of a sudden like, "Whoa, okay, Oklahoma really does like this guy, and they're making this move, a week before they're set to join the SEC." This year, do you believe there's this strong internal belief that Venables can and will win the all-important Lincoln Riley breakup?
I think he can. It's going to be difficult because the schedule's so tough. I think I think Brent's going to have a good team. I don't know if they're going to have a good record. The conference schedule is so difficult, but I also think that there's a little bit. This is now, some people disagree with me. I don't think that Brent is coaching with a ton of pressure,
Mm.
other than every coach feels pressure because they want to win. But that extension you talk about, that is such an advantageous contract for Brent Venables. I don't know that Oklahoma can afford to fire him, unless disaster hits 4-8. We talk a lot. You guys talk a lot about it on the podcast. The history of buyouts. If you remember, I remember, what year did Auburn fire Gus Malzahn? After 19, was
After
19?
20, after 20,
After
yeah.
20. Okay. Gus gets fired, and help me if I'm right, correct me. I think his buyout was either 19 or 21 million.
21 and a half, yeah.
Okay, 21 million. And the nation was aghast. In Oklahoma, we thought, what are they doing? A $21 million buyout for Gus Malzahn? That's crazy. Where does that money come from? And then 2 years later, Texas A&M fires Jimbo, $76 million, and nobody bats an eye. We just say, oh, yeah, they got the money. They got a lot of oil wells down there. They want to win. Jimbo's causing problems. Just, well, you gotta move on. And it just shows how quickly we just write off all that money. And we forget how much money $21 million is. And Brent's now, his buyout was 35 million. We forget $35 million in this day and age. You know what $35 million can do for a football roster? Just keep seven, they wouldn't have to write him a check. It'd be paid off over the years. But I just think sometimes we don't appreciate the value of all this money and what it can be used for. At Oklahoma, it can be used for a whole bunch of offensive tackles and wide receivers, and the next John Mateer that can turn. If you got Brent Venables, you got a defense. You know that. Go fund you an offense, you won't have to worry about not winning enough games. So I think Brent's actually a lot safer than most people do, just because I don't know that OU's got the money to sit around saying, "Hey, we'll pay off our coach and go get all these ball players."
They've never had to find out. There are certain programs that have never really had to broach the subject. In this day and age, it is such a blessing to not have to be looking at that number and to not wonder in the back of your mind, is this the type of check that we're going to have to go to all of our boosters to ask them to be able to cover? And it speaks to OU success, but it also speaks to a very unique situation where the Stoops generation and the way that ended Oklahoma didn't have to get to the stage that his brother got to at Kentucky right now, where they're having to wonder, are we going to have to fire our most winningest coach ever? And they didn't have to ever get to that place with Lincoln Riley because obviously he left on his own accord. And now you're kind of in this new spot. And it's going to be so interesting to see how this is talked about and if this is going to change at all. Because, man, if they go 5-7, it's curtains. Like it's curtains, and we're going to see unprecedented money. And I agree with you 100%. Like the roster might end up being better than what the record reflects, but that's kind of what you set up for. Is there a number you have in mind that'd be defined as a successful off the hot seat nationally type of season for Brent Venables?
Oh, off the hot seat nationally, I'd say eight wins.
Agreed.
Um, yeah, and I think that's doable. Um, the non-conference is fairly navigable. I don't, Michigan comes to town, and you need to beat Michigan. The Wolverines, um, were just so-so last year until the end of the year, beating Ohio State and Alabama. But um, that's a game you need to win. New quarterback, freshman quarterback, Brent Venables ought to be able to mess with his mind, all for 60 minutes. And games in Norman, need to win that one. But otherwise, 4-0 in the 4-0 in the non-conference means go 4-4 in SEC play. The schedule breaks a little bit for them in that this year they got 4 conference home games. Last year they only had 3 because they had the Texas home game, played in Dallas. So it's a little bit easier schedule just from looking at the opponents. Tennessee looks like it's down from where it was last year, not just the Nico stuff, but the Nico stuff. Um, is Ole Miss going to be what it was? Auburn doesn't look like it's taken a huge step. And so it looks like, they certainly should beat Missouri and Norman. They should have beat them in Columbia last year. So 8 is not a crazy, that's not a storybook year. They ought to be able to get to 8. And if they do, I think everything will be fine. You don't want to lose to Texas too many years in a row. That gets you in trouble in Norman. But people realize the Longhorns. This is a glory. The golden age, one of the golden ages for Texas football going on. So beating the Longhorns in Dallas is going to be very difficult. But Brent has done it once. Can he do it again? That would change the dynamics of the number we're talking about. That game counts for little more than one, maybe. Beat Texas and go 7-5, and you're probably, everybody's probably thinking this is all right. So a lot of dynamics on that schedule, but I do think getting to 8 would end any talk about Brent Venables' future.
Who do Oklahoma fans currently hate more, Brent Venables or Texas? Just kidding, not Brent Venables, Lincoln Riley. Let me rephrase that. Let me back up. Somebody's going to clip that, and that's going to sound really weird. Who do Oklahoma fans hate more right now, Lincoln Riley or Texas?
Um, I actually think it's Texas. They they would have to stop and think about it. It would make them stop whatever they're doing and concentrate on it. But here's the truth. There was a time they loved Lincoln Riley. There was a time they were proud of Lincoln Riley. There was a time when they were just thrilled they had Lincoln Riley and nobody else did. And they thought they had their coach for a generation. And sometimes if you'll just let your memory work, it can soften your soul a little bit. And so that's what I urge OU fans to do about Lincoln. He had a deal at his weekly radio show, or I guess it's a television show. I don't know. Everything's simulcast so much. I don't know what you call it, but his weekly show, Teddy Lehman, the former OU linebacker, would quiz him every week. He would go back in time, 2018 Iowa State game or 2016 TCU game. Third quarter, you're up 27-7. It's 3rd and 4 from midfield. What'd you call? And Lincoln Riley could remember what he called. He'd say, well, we ran bootleg with Baker, and he dumped it off to Mark Andrews for a 14-yard gain or whatever. and OU fans would just go crazy at this guy's intellect and his memory and his ability to handle the mental side of the game. They were so proud of that. Look how smart our coach is. And when they think back to things like that, and they think back to the quarterback progression of all those great years of all those guys, I think it'll warm their heart a little bit. And I'm hard pressed to think of any warm fuzzies they ever get about Texas. So I think the quick answer would probably emotionally, they might just say Lincoln, hate Lincoln the most. But if they think about it for 10 seconds, I think it'll go Texas.
Counterpoint, if you listen to true crime podcasts, it's not the hatred of the hatred that murderers have is often for someone they once loved. It's not
Yeah,
for a
that's
stranger. It's not for someone that they've always had this pure hatred for. It's, that they know each other and there's this history, and that's just so hard. It's always going to be so hard to erase, and it's hard to picture what that would ever look like if that dynamic changed. You
yeah. Hey, Connor, here's what I tell some OU fans when they ask me about it or when we talk about Lincoln. I say, let's say this job comes open. And maybe it's not Brent getting fired. Maybe he gets fired, maybe he becomes the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. What if Lincoln wants to come back? Would you
man,
take it? The answer, a quick no, but in their heart of hearts, they would think, hey, maybe we need to have Lincoln back. So I think you're right. There's a lot of emotion. I'm taught on Law and Order and Dragnet and all the great cop shows of all time that, where does all the hate come from? It comes from love originally. But uh, I actually think there's a little bit of space in their heart still for Lincoln Riley.
Scott Frost went back to UCF. Rich Rodriguez went back to West Virginia. We're just saying, the
A
reunions are
trend.
kind of
It's a
in vogue.
trend.
Yeah, just saying. Speaking of breakups, it's ironic that everyone right now in college football is kind of talking about the Josh Heupel, Nico Iamaleava breakup. When last year the breakup that everyone was dissecting was the Heupel Oklahoma breakup, and leading up to that game, the buildup was tremendous. It was kind of a dream for people like us that write and talk about this stuff. But you saw that emotion that Heupel had after winning that game, what that meant to him. As much as he downplayed it, it still felt really significant. What's the sense that you get with the current state of the Heupel Oklahoma relationship? Is there any more bad blood there to be had?
Oh, I think, first of all, I think the ice is slowly melting and maybe not even slowly. I think it's melting at a pretty rapid race. When you win, when you get the last laugh, you lose a lot of the animosity. So I think Josh is in a pretty good place. And, most of Josh's animosity was not directed at the institution or many of the people. It was mostly at Bob Stoops and probably a little bit at Joe Castiglione. And um, these are two pretty high quality people, and Josh knows that. He knows that. And even before last year's game, there were some, Stoops told me the story, that Josh had come up to him at the College Football Hall of Fame induction ceremony or weekend and congratulated him, and it meant the world to Bob for Josh to do that. It wasn't any kind of great reunion, but just Josh reaching out meant the world to Bob. And so, Heupel's he's been getting better on this. So I think it's slowly getting back to where it's not a bad place anymore. And the best revenge is live well, and restoring the tradition and the success at Tennessee makes for a pretty good life. It's a pretty good place to coach football, Rocky Top. And when you've won like Heupel has, beating Alabama, making the college football playoff, doing all those things, he's a hero in a place that's a pretty good place to be a hero in. And life's turned out pretty good for him. His career's going really well. So I think it's, and Josh is a quality person too. I don't know of anybody that says otherwise. So he knows that. I think he's in a pretty good place, and I think that's going to get better and better.
You just threw out the idea of Lincoln Riley potentially a return. What that ever could look like if that possibility, just that hypothetical. If Venables does indeed get fired, and I'm not saying that's this year, would you ever expect Oklahoma to just write Josh Heupel a blank check to return to Norman?
He'd be the first call, I assume. Um, I have no idea if Josh would would entertain the notion or accept. I have no idea. I do know this. He still has a lot of ties, family still lives here. His sister married the son of David Boren, the 24-year OU president, prominent president. David Boren died last year, but um, his Josh's son-in-law, his brother-in-law, is a former United States congressman, prominent Oklahoman. So they got a lot of Oklahoma ties still. So he wouldn't. I don't think he would dismiss it. I also think it'd be a very popular choice. I don't know that he would do it. Like I said, Tennessee's a pretty good place to coach football. But, the thing about the Sooners is in their history, they've hired one head coach. They've always hired an assistant, often from promoting from within, but also going out and getting somebody with Oklahoma ties or non Oklahoma ties off another staff. And they've been incredibly successful with that model. Is this the kind of time when you change that and you actually go get an established head coach? If you want to change what you've always done, Josh Heupel's a pretty good reason to do it. So I think he would be the first call they would make. But I don't, I have no idea how Josh would feel about that. But I do think it's something he would have to at least consider.
Let's get you out of here with a story of your choosing. Let's go in the way back machine here and talk about things that happened before I was even born. Give me your favorite story, either from covering Brian Bosworth or the greatest that never was, Marcus Dupree.
Um, Marcus Dupree is the best. Marcus Dupree was such a he's such a child in a man's body. And I don't mean a simple child, but he got here at 18. He's bigger than everybody, he's faster than everybody. And he was literally an 18-year-old kid who hadn't had a lot of guidance growing up, and then comes to Oklahoma with virtually no guidance around him. And he was here 15 months or so, 14 months. And we look back and say, what happened to Marcus Dupree and how could it go wrong? I think when I look back at Marcus Dupree, I think, how did it go right as long as it did? I mean, this guy had the world at his tail and really wasn't prepared for it. I mean, this guy was Herschel Walker. He was, Adrian Peterson. He's whatever great massive running back you want to grab. And he just wasn't prepared for that spotlight or that commitment. Barry Switzer has talked about how he thinks he failed Marcus, didn't really realize the extent to which Marcus needed some protection and some guidance. But the thing I liked about Marcus is he was really a nice fella. I mean, those were the days 40 years ago. You just go to practice. After practice, just go talk to whoever you wanted to. You didn't have to call and say, hey, can I get a interview with Marcus Dupree? And they say, well, we'll check with coach, or we'll try to pencil you in 4 weeks from now. Just go to practice and grab Marcus Dupree after practice. And he was just a nice fella, down to earth kid from Philadelphia, Mississippi. And um, years later, Oklahoma State played at Mississippi State in September of 1998, I think it was. And we go down to Mississippi to cover the game, and we make arrangements. At the time, Marcus had a son, Marquez, playing high school football for Philadelphia, Mississippi. And we made arrangements to meet up with Marcus and watch the game with him and watch his son play high school football in somewhere in Mississippi. and just the natural hospitality that Marcus Dupree had, just willing to talk about his son and his days at Oklahoma. And I just remember thinking, sitting here on the sidelines of a high school football field in Philadelphia, in Mississippi, talking with Marcus Dupree about his son and everything he's gone through. And then years later, of course, Marcus since comes back to Oklahoma all the time, signs autographs, is pretty popular around town for a guy that's really only played a year at Oklahoma. But just one of the all-time great what could have been stories for a really pretty good guy who just was put in a situation not of his doing, and just an unfortunate byproduct of the time and the way college football was back then.
Something to be said for it. And it's an all-time 30 for 30 for those who haven't seen it. And just a great reminder that you need to go in the right situation. You need to be, with the right people, with Herschel. The Vince Dooley guidance was such a big part of his career that probably doesn't get talked about enough. And the things that he would do of like getting a police escort after quickly realizing his freshman year how much everybody just wanted a piece of him. And there were certain things that you talk about with Barry Switzer that, yeah, he probably could have done differently with Marcus Dupree. That could have changed his entire trajectory, even before the bowl game when he was talking about how, or like after the bowl game, he goes off and he's talking about, well, he was out of shape. And it's like, well, dude just ran for what, like 250 yards in a bowl game. What are you doing? It's your true freshman.
239 yards against Arizona State in the Fiesta Bowl. And Switzer said it could have been more. That's an example of the demands on this 18-year-old kid. He has a game for the ages. People want more.
Yeah, would never happen in this day and age, needless to say. Yeah. Barry, really appreciate the time. Everybody go follow Barry's work, Tulsa World. You've been doing it for a really long time. And I know people obviously look to you as a voice in that community and know that it really means a lot. So appreciate you doing this and look forward to seeing you at SEC Media Days again this year.
Hey, thank you, Connor, and thanks for keeping me up to date on all things SEC. I go to your podcast every week, and really has helped me get baptized into the conference.
Thank you, man. Really appreciate that.